Good afternoon to everyone who's here. This is the monthly meetup that I do. Sometimes we're doing it virtually and sometimes we're doing it in person. Guess what? This month is virtually. So I've received a number of questions and I'm going to go through them. I kind of hate doing this because I'm just reading and feel like I'm talking to myself, but we get questions in advance and that's what I'll read through. Lindsay, tell me or tell folks how they can submit questions during this meetup.
They can email chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
Email chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
Or message us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube.
Or message us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. And
on Facebook and YouTube are active.
And is there an address for?
ChairmanMendelson.com/live.
Chairmanmendelson.com/live.
Facebook page, which is Chairman Phil Mendelson.
And the Facebook page is Chairman Phil Mendelson. Okay, so let me read questions. And I'm just reading these in order. The first is DCPS has decided to relocate Whittier Elementary School to the swing space at Sharp Health. Sharp Health is simply unacceptable for Whittier. It is too far away and the risks to the school and surrounding community are too great. Can you all develop an alternative plan that satisfies the need to modernize our building while also preserving our school community? My recollection is a couple of years ago, the proposed swing space was worse and that folks were excited when Councilmember Lewis George was able to get DCPS to revise the swing space. I also know there's been some talk about trailers at, I believe, Coolidge. The trailers has some drawbacks to it. It's apparently quite a cost. But that's actually not answering the question. I'm certainly willing to work with Councilmember Lewis George and see if there is an alternative plan. I have a note regarding the next question that says that these trailers cost somewhere between $5 to $10 million. And that's an awful lot of money. When there's a much cheaper solution, but that doesn't mean that I'll repeat what I said. I'm willing to work with Councilmember Lewis George to see if we can find another solution. Next question. DCPS's current plan is to send our students, which I think is Amadon Bowen, from Southwest to Meyer Elementary School in Columbia Heights for 2 years during modernization renovations in 2027 to 2029. That's 3.5 miles and about 40 minutes away in rush hour traffic. Our school community is very concerned about the effect of swinging so far on our kids and on the community itself. My understanding at this point is that DCPS is saying it's a matter of cost. It costs somewhere between $5 and $10 million to build trailers. DCPS is justifying the cost of doing this in Ward 5 for a couple of schools because the 2 schools will use the same space, which effectively cuts the cost in half for each school. Again, I'm willing to work with the ward member, see if there's an alternative. Generally with these issues of modernization and a swing space, I look to the ward member for guidance. Actually, if I didn't, the ward member would probably be upset with me. Next question. Does Chairman Mendelson have any information from the Department of Health about the cluster models funding, implementation, and recruitment and retention projections? I believe this refers to nurses. We would also like to know if the chairman would support reviving the prior mandate that every school have a full-time nurse that was repealed. The current situation is untenable and dangerous. Give me just a second. I think there's a phone ringing. Sorry about that. I don't recall if the council repealed the requirement that every school have a full-time nurse. What's happened is that there's a nurse shortage. Department of Health and not DCPS, but Department of Health contracts with Children's Hospital and has been struggling to find more nurses. So that's why they went to the cluster model. And I think everyone agrees that the new cluster nursing model is not working as well as had been promised. And that is disturbing to me. Councilmember Henderson, who chairs the Health Committee, is planning on having a hearing on implementation in January. Councilmember Henderson has been a active chair of the Health Committee. And so I used to be more involved with some of these health issues because there was not as strong a health committee. But with Councilmember Henderson, I'm working with her, and in this case, have been generally working with her, generally following her leadership with regard to nurses. Because as I said, there's a shortage. The contract has been with Children's Hospital, and Department of Health is the agency that's responsible. Let me say this. I agree that every school should have a full-time nurse, and that's what we have to strive for. But we can't just simply make it happen, and it's not a function of the law having been changed. I have a number of questions regarding security, maybe just three. Can you tell us where in the process any new and or improved crime legislation stands? The Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, chaired by Councilmember Brooke Pinto, has had hearings on a number of bills over the last several weeks. I believe actually had some hearings earlier this fall. I'm expecting that she's going to collapse the bills into one omnibus bill, or she will move the bills separately. That doesn't mean every one of the bills will move. And it doesn't mean that every bill will move without any changes. With regard to the mayor's legislation, actually, I think even the bill that Councilmember Pinto introduced, there are some controversial provisions, and I expect there will be some refinements to these bills before they move. I'm hopeful that we'll see legislation move early in the new year. I think that's the best I can say at this point. I am in conversation with Councilmember Pinto from time to time, and talking to her about her schedule and what she's planning on doing. Sorry, I was getting distracted by a phone call. The next question really kind of blows my mind. Why were so few gun laws passed in 2022? What is the reasoning behind this? The reason why it blows my mind is that we have one of the strongest gun control laws in the country. And so it's not that a legislature has to pass a bill every year to show that it's doing something. If we already have a pretty good law in place, then there's not much more we can do. Pretty much everything that's been discussed in the national debate about gun control has already been applied in the district. We prohibit large capacity magazines. We prohibit Saturday night specials, that kind of cheap handgun. We prohibit the attachments that can transform or change a gun from semi-automatic to automatic. We have a red flag law. We have a registration requirement. There are quite a number of things that we've done. And so at this point, our posture, unfortunately, is looking at the jurisprudence around the country. And when we think that there is a provision that has been held by courts to be unconstitutional, and therefore we probably have to make a change, we make the change. And in that way, we've been protecting our gun laws from being overturned by the courts. The nation's courts, the federal courts, have unfortunately gotten more conservative with regard to gun control. I find it alarming. For roughly 60 or 70 years, The Second Amendment was held to believe that the right to bear arms was about a militia. If you look at the language in the amendment, it's a bit confusing. I believe it starts a well-regulated militia being necessary. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the Supreme Court in 2008 reversed that Supreme Court ruling from the 1930s. And ever since then, the jurisprudence has only gotten worse. Not only is there a right to have a gun, but there's a right to have a gun carry permit. And there even is effort to get the courts to say that one doesn't need a permit. So we're trying to keep our laws as strong as we can. But in any event, so few gun laws were passed in 2022 because we've already passed them. Next question. We recently had a homicide occur in our small one-way, one-block-long street in Ward 8 outside of a large transitional housing project at the corner. It's been hard to get updates on where the investigation stands and feels like we are trying to move forward on our own without backup from the district. This shelter was originally a women's shelter, but is now under new ownership and management. It houses a broader range of residents. Our daily lives have been impacted by this change in direction, which we believe exists more because lack of oversight and not the residents themselves. That is, I guess, that the negative effects have been lack of oversight by the district over this facility, more so than the residents themselves. Can you help us find a good path forward? I recommend that the person who sent this question contact my constituent service folks. What's the address? I think it's
Chairman CS.
Chairman CS, that CS is for constituent services, Chairman CS at dccouncil.gov. Reach out and we'll see if we can help specifically with regard to this. I think it's wrong that MPD is keeping you in the dark with regard to the investigation. I understand that they can't be fully forthcoming with regard to suspects or leads, but you shouldn't be in the dark. The next four questions are on different issues. And again, send your questions if you have them to, where do they send them again? Chairman CS at dccouncil.gov or
ask in the chats, Facebook or YouTube.
or you can ask in the chats of Facebook or YouTube. What is Chairman Mendelson's position on the installation of artificial turf at schools and recreation centers in the district? All artificial turf contains PFAS. And the question concludes, given the Attorney General's July lawsuit against the manufacturers of PFAS. We passed legislation a couple of years ago that I believe requires the Department of Recreation, when it's installing or changing the artificial turf, that it has to use a different kind. I'm assuming that the question has to do with the, I want to say rubberized content of these fields. And the council's passed legislation, and I think over time that means that these fields will change. Next question. DC Council has taken bold steps in the past to uplift the need for action when it comes to international crises, from apartheid in South Africa to most recently the war in Ukraine. We see daily protests on the streets of DC and neighbors across the city calling for a permanent ceasefire. I assume this refers to Gaza. As your constituent, I'm urging you to do the same and push for a resolution to be passed. I think that the council should refrain from passing a resolution and getting into international. I realize that in the question, there's a reference to earlier actions, which seemed much simpler in nature. And I think that at this point, my own view is that the council should stay out of this. We did host a briefing because I think it's important to hear different perspectives. Next question. I would like to hear Chairman Mendelson's thoughts on the viability of the existing contract the district has with Intralot. What are the council's plans for sports betting in the district and the Intralot contract expiring in 2024? We approved the Intralot contract on the advice of the chief financial officer who administers or oversees the legalized gambling in the district, the lottery board. I have heard a lot of reports that Intralot is not well run. I've heard a lot of reasons or explanations or suggestions why it's not being well run. And I personally, I look to the chief financial officer for guidance on this. I also am aware of the fact that there's a lot of money in gambling, which means there's a lot of money for lobbyists, and that the different potential contractors always have reasons to talk trash about their competitors. So I think that's an important part of perspective here. If the contract's up in 2024, then this will be revisited. It's under the oversight of Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie, who chairs the Business and Economic Development Committee. And that's who should be looking at it. As I said, look to the chief financial officer for guidance. What are your thoughts about the Connecticut Avenue proposal to reduce lanes and parking and adding dedicated bike lanes? What are my thoughts after receiving the letter of non-support from the FOP? I actually haven't seen the letter from the FOP. So I can't speak to what that letter says. I would say that there have been some concerns raised about public safety. It's not clear to me that, in fact, the proposed bike lanes and removal of parking would impede public safety, but I think that is an important question to answer. But I'll say this. I don't know that there is, at this point in December of 2023, a specific proposal that's pending. There's certainly nothing before the council. And my sense is that there's been enough controversy around it that whatever may happen is still a ways off, and that there's going to be some more evaluation. The last question I have here is, what is the status of the BHG Methadone Clinic on Good Hope Road, which, by the way, is now named Marionberry Avenue? ANC 8A and other decision makers have requested and supported moving the clinic to St. Elizabeth's campus, and there has been discussion at the ANCs that the clinic is also supportive of moving, as it will provide clinic users access to a broader range of services. Is the holdup funding from the city? Is the holdup funding from the city to facilitate the move? I really don't know. I know that there's a lot of controversy around the methadone clinic. I know that that controversy is because there have been a lot of problems associated with that clinic. Those problems seem to spill out into the neighborhood. This comes under the health committee, and so I'm not so familiar with the latest, which apparently is that the ANCs and even the clinic have proposed moving to St. Elizabeth's. I'd like to hear what Department of Health says with regard to St. Elizabeth's, but I don't know that I can add more. I don't know any more about the status. With that, I've gone through all of the options.
Okay, we got quite a few. We got a couple of emails. We also got a follow-up on the nursing question, so we'll come back around to that. So, can you please ask Chairman Mendelson whether he supports the provisions of the mayor's new crime bill that will roll back police transparency reforms that the Police Reform Commission recommended and the chairman put forward. As further comment, I do not understand the reducing police transparency and basic accountability would help fight.
I don't know if you all heard that, but do I support the proposals that are in the mayor's crime bill that would, as the questioner put it, roll back provisions the council adopted requiring greater transparency from the police. Generally, no, I don't support that. And it is in the questionnaire noted in the question that those proposals don't directly deal with violent crime, and I completely agree. It's a comment I've made a number of times. If we're concerned about homicides and shootings and robberies, then if there's legislation to be considered, it ought to deal with homicides, robberies, and so forth. And the mayor's bill didn't do that. That doesn't mean there aren't some things in the mayor's bill that we ought to adopt. But the mayor's proposes, for example, reversing some of the authority we gave to the Independent Police Complaints Board or Office of Police Complaints, which is an an agency independent of the police department, where citizens can file complaints about police conduct. And we've seen as a best practice that you want that kind of accountability mechanism, that police, I guess this is pretty much true with anybody, that they're not always the best people to evaluate and judge and correct their conduct, that you need outside, like the Office of Police Complaints. So I don't support that. I think there's also, the mayor proposed a change in the FOIA law regarding public records. The mayor also proposed, now it just slipped to my mind, the, with regard to accountability. Yes, that disciplinary records can't be public. What the council approved, and this has been misstated by the FOP many, many, many times, what the council legislated was that where there have been allegations of misconduct that have been sustained, in other words, the officer was found guilty of the misconduct, that should be a public record. It's been misstated as whenever there's an allegation, that should be a public record. That's not what the law requires. So these, the MPD is different than any other agency in the district government, because MPD is the only agency that has the authority to detain people and deprive them of their liberty, to shoot people, even kill them. And so they should be held to a higher standard with regard to accountability. And that means that if there are complaints, that we have mechanisms in place to assure a more objective investigation or investigation or fact-finding. And there are several provisions in the mayor's bill, which, if I remember correctly, has almost 24 provisions. There's several that would roll back some of these accountability reforms. If we're going to, we know that as a fact that effective policing involves community trust. And if we want to ensure community trust, then there has to be fair and accurate accountability. And those are the provisions that are, some of which that the mayor is now challenging or wants to roll back, and I don't agree. Next question.
Can you please provide your stance on changing the law to allow government employees the right to strike? Additionally, I'm curious to know if you would be open to the idea of establishing a committee to further explore and discuss this matter.
Question was whether I would support changing the law to give employees the right to strike. DC government employees the right to strike, and whether I would support a working group to look at this. I'm kind of surprised at the question. It's been the law for decades that employees, that union members or unions cannot strike. But in return, there's binding arbitration. Employees typically in any business strike when they're bargaining for a new agreement, a new contract. And so decades ago, the government took away the right of employees to strike, but then in return in exchange gave them binding arbitration. So you go through the collective bargaining process. If the union doesn't like what management's putting on the table, the union can declare impasse and end up with binding arbitration, I have seen where these decisions have gone both ways. Sometimes the union's not happy with what the arbitrator said. Usually the union is happy and the government is not happy. And the government stuck with it, gave up the, or took away the right to strike, and in return, accepted that an arbitrator can tell the government what to do.
Will you commit to holding a public hearing or roundtable on the recommendations of the Tax Revision Commission? If so, when?
Will I commit to having a public hearing on the recommendations of the Tax Revision Commission, and if so, when? Yes, there will be a public hearing. When, I don't know. When is the commission going to issue its recommendations? I don't know that. I know they're getting close. There were rumors that there was going to be a draft report for the commission to consider a couple of weeks ago. That did not happen. I think it's quite possible that the recommendations will not be implementable this year, that is with the budget that we have in March. My understanding is that some of the recommendations will be exceedingly complex with regard to the legislative drafting that's necessary. So when the commission issues its report, I will look to schedule a hearing fairly quickly. The last time this was the committee of the whole, and I expect it'll be that way again. But not but. So yes, there will be a hearing and it will be fairly quickly, but I don't know when. Lindsay?
Okay, this is a two-part question. I was shocked to read the Post story this afternoon that says Virginia is likely to approve a plan to lure the Capitals and Wizards to Potomac Yards. Is the council doing everything possible to keep the teams in DC? The story mentioned buskers that blast music all day in the summer in Chinatown. Is the council addressing that problem?
All right, two parts to the two questions related to the same thing, monumental sports, the Caps and the Wizards. The Washington Post had an article this afternoon online that Virginia is looking to make a decision that would incentivize the Capitals and Wizards to move to Virginia, and is the council doing anything about it? The second part of the question is that apparently the story also mentioned buskers. Those are the typically musicians who play very loudly. And one of the places they do this is near the arena. And is the council doing anything about that? With regard to the Capitals, Wizards, monumental sports moving, yes, I am aware that Virginia is trying to attract them. And yes, there have been discussions. The mayor and I have been working with Monumental Sports, and we gave them a very strong offer. And I would say we're doing everything we can at this point to try to ensure that they stay. Now, when I say offer, this would be an offer to financially support the renovation of the arena, which is the choice that Monumental apparently has: a new facility in Virginia or renovating the facility here, which is about 25 years old. Monumental, the activity around with the arena is almost daily, and so the economic impact is huge, and it's worth the district government continuing its partnership, which we've had over the years. We were a partner in helping Monumental, which had a different name when Abe Pullen had it, to locate at its current site. And then we helped again with some renovations in 2007. So I think it's valuable, and definitely we see the economic benefit of continuing to partner with Monumental. With regard to the buskers, I like the question because we have struggled with legislation for a number of years that's been vehemently opposed by street musicians and a variety of groups that have aligned themselves often on what's alleged to be cultural grounds. Nobody's talking about shutting down music, but they are talking about reducing the volume, lowering the decibel level. You know, conversational is about 70 decibels, and this music at the arena can be about 110, 120 decibels. And this is logarithmic, which means that it's not like 140 is twice as loud as 70. It's more like I'm going to say 110 is, or 100 is twice as loud as 70. But there's been a lot of opposition, including in the council. And what I have said to neighbors of these areas like and Gallery Place, that they need to put pressure on the council members who balked at changing the law. Next question.
Is the council considering stiffer penalties for dog jackings? As you know, there have been many dogs stolen this year. I believe the current code only treats them as a piece of property.
Question. Is the council considering legislation, or will the council consider legislation to increase the penalty for dog jacking? There have been a number of instances this year, and according to the questioner, it is considered a piece of property, which I think means a misdemeanor. Right, it depends. I hate to give this kind of answer, and I have to say that it's horrible when a pet is stolen. The actually I can't imagine it, and I have a pet. The if somebody steals a dog, like dog jacks, such as we heard in the news last week with, I think it was a French bulldog. I believe that is a form of robbery, and that is a felony. That does not require a change in the law. If someone steals a dog out of a backyard, there's no threat to a person, that would probably be theft, and depending upon the dog is probably a misdemeanor. I acknowledge that the pain can be horrible to the owner. This French bulldog, as I recall, because I looked it up, French bulldogs are worth thousands of dollars, and I believe that would be felony theft. If the animal is like my cat, who's just a mutt, I don't think they call cats mutts, but unfortunately, I think that would be just a ordinary theft and would be a misdemeanor. You know, the bigger problem with crime is not what the penalty is, because if you think about it, criminals really aren't thinking about what the penalty is. They're thinking about what the likelihood is of their not getting caught. It's just like with children when they do something wrong. What's the likelihood of getting caught? And of course, if they get caught, there's a punishment. But a child doesn't evaluate, well, if I do this, I'll get grounded for 2 months. Or if I do that, I'll only get grounded for a day. So we need to be closing more cases. And I constantly ask the chief of police, what additional resources can the council provide so that the police can close more cases? That's what will make a difference. So the person who wants to steal an animal out of a backyard, their calculus is that they're not going to get caught, and they won't get caught. And if they don't get caught, doesn't matter what the penalty is. But the more alarming, the French bulldog that was literally stolen from this woman under threat, that's a felony. Lindsay?
The executive director of ANCs advises ANCs to disable the chat feature in virtual meetings. Makes it impossible for residents to comment, raise questions, and see who's attending the meeting. Is the council endorsing these procedures that seemingly undermine the main purpose of community engagement with ANCs?
I have no idea if any of you could hear that, but The director of the Office of the ANCs has advised ANCs that during their meetings, they should turn off their chat function. And the questioner says that this is actually part of democracy. Am I right?
Yes.
And has the council going to weigh in? Well, I can't speak for the committee, which is chaired by Robert White, whether they're going to weigh in. I was an ANC commissioner for 20 years, and the chat would be analogous to people having side conversations during a meeting, which an ANC really can't deal with because the ANC can only deal with whatever's on the table, whether it's a motion or an issue or a presentation that's being made, or during a community input period, a speaker who's speaking to the commission. So these sidebar conversations, which is what I think these chats are, it's very hard for a deliberative body like the ANC to be able to consider those. So personally, I'm not troubled by the chat function being turned off. If it's turned on, everybody should have equal access. If it's turned off, then everybody's treated this or should be treated the same that way. What is more concerning is if the allegation is that the ANC is telling certain people that they can't address the ANC. That would be wrong. Lindsay,
This is a follow-up to the nursing cluster question from.
follow up to nursing.
The Public Schools Health Services Act of 2017, which mandated that each school have a full-time nurse, was repealed in summer. And to follow up with Children's Hospital is not delivering on its contract to deliver nurses to every school, can easily find a different contractor. And where the council devote additional funding to raise nurse pay.
Well, the follow up, which I assume is from the same questioner, says that we repealed the act during the summer. Is there a bill number, Lindsay?
Yes. Says part of the code. Effective 2018 is repealed. I'm not sure when it says 2261 is the law number.
2261
Mhm.
is the law number. I'm kind of curious.
It was in the, it looks like VSA. FY24 VSA.
Okay. So it's quite possible that I was wrong when I said we didn't repeal the law. And I will look at that further. The challenge is what I said before, there aren't enough nurses. The questioner says, well, could we find a different contractor than Children's Hospital? Well, that gets into the procurement process. Not only is the council not part of the procurement process, but because I don't chair the health committee, I'm not that intimately familiar with what is going on with regard to the availability of contractors. Children's National Hospital has a good reputation. And when we're talking about students, we're talking about young people, and that would be more appropriate for Children's Hospital. I'm not aware that we could just simply find another contractor. And besides, I'm assuming that Children's got the contract on a competitive basis. I'm also not sure that another contractor would have as much expertise. I'm thinking, for example, there are nurse staffing agencies, and I don't think you get the quality assurance for pediatric nurses, which is a long way of saying I don't think that that's a simple solution here to just simply replace children's. There was another part to the question.
Is the council looking at funding increases in nurse pay?
So I had a hearing a couple months ago where this came up. I want to say it might have been a joint hearing with Councilmember Henderson, pressing the executive with regard to what they're doing because we want to make sure that every school has a nurse. And the cluster model was supposed to provide a minimum of coverage, and that's falling short. So the other part of the question was whether the council is doing anything to increase the pay of nurses. The short answer is no. This is private sector, and yes, we've stepped in with regard to childcare facilities, but I'm not aware of any effort with regard to nurses' pay. Lindsay?
When is the city going to get the current uptick in crime that's spiraling out of control, in control?
When is the council going to get the uptick in crime, which is spiraling out of control? When are we going to get it in control? The council does not hire police. The council does not supervise police. The council is not responsible for the police. The council does adopt a budget for the police department. The budget that we adopted for the current fiscal year was what the mayor requested. And that was true last year. And I say all that because there has been a theme in some of the political rhetoric that the council holds the keys to solving this problem. The council adopts the budget, the council adopts policy. Our policy is clear. We do not want crime. This council is more police friendly than past councils. This council reversed a decision a couple of years ago to eliminate school resource officers, for example. The council this summer adopted emergency legislation that modified some of the changes that the earlier council had adopted in 2020. For instance, vehicular chases. So this is a different council. It's much friendlier. I don't want to say much. It is friendlier to the police. But nonetheless, it's convenient to say, well, we need to pass a law. And I maintain over and over again that the biggest difference with regard to reducing crime is arresting people, solving cases. So when people break the law, there's already a law. So we don't need to adopt a law that says that what they're doing is against the law. That's kind of stating the obvious. And when they break the law and they don't get arrested, it doesn't matter how long the penalty is because they haven't been arrested. And the research is quite clear that the length of a sentence is not what criminals consider when they consider a criminal act. Many of the criminal acts aren't really very well thought through. And so the length of the sentence doesn't really have an effect. But if there is no, but I said that already. So, but what does have a deterrent effect is catching people for two reasons. One, a lot of crime is committed by repeat offenders. If you arrest them and you lock them up, then they can't commit another crime. But also, as I said, the calculus is, am I going to get caught? And when they get arrested, they get caught. Now, somebody could say, well, but the judges are letting them out. There is some truth to that. I think that I don't think that that's been well researched to see how often that is the case. In other words, what percentage of folks are arrested and released pending trial and reoffend while they are released? I've seen some numbers and the numbers are actually pretty low. And if the numbers are pretty low, it doesn't follow that the best solution is to take everybody who's arrested pre-trial and lock them up. And in fact, there are constitutional constraints in that regard because people are presumed innocent until proven guilty. I hope I'm not losing anyone here. People are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The law is that if a court determines that the person is a risk of flight or a risk to public safety, they can be held pending trial. That's the basis on which people can be held. And I think I may have to take this call, so forgive me for a moment. Sorry about that. So I do think it's worth looking at whether the courts are being as careful in deciding whether to release. But we also need to look at whether the U.S. attorney who does all of our prosecutions is being as aggressive and persuasive as possible to convince the court that the person is a risk to public safety or flight. So those are important components, but neither of which involve the legislature in terms of passing a law. But also the most effective deterrent is arresting people. Less than half of homicides are closed with an arrest within 12 months. Somewhere around 25% of robberies are closed with an arrest. We need to get those numbers higher, and that too does not involve legislation. Council oversight, yes, and the Judiciary Committee has been having hearings. Lindsay? No, and let me just add, and I'm open to suggestions. I'm constantly looking at whether there's something else that we might be able to do. Lindsay?
Has the council considered legislative presented options for housing the constituents that exit the stabilization center on K Street?
I have no idea. Has the council considered options for
Housing
constituents who are exiting the stabilization center on K Street? I really don't know. But I will say this, that I have pushed legislation with regard to emergency rental assistance, which I think is somewhat analogous, that requires that the Department of Human Services do a better job of casework with the individuals, because that helps them with exiting. In that case, rapid rehousing. It sounds somewhat similar with exiting the stabilization center. It is a problem in government that government too often is just content with opening the door and pushing somebody out. Hey, they're free now, and it doesn't work that way. The agencies responsible really should be looking at what I would call re-entry planning and helping folks with housing. Lindsay?
How can the public work with the council to apply pressure on the mayor to follow the law and implement the FY24 SNAP benefit increases? Will you call on the OAG to sue the mayor for failure to implement these increases?
How can the council work with the public to put pressure on the mayor to fund the SNAP benefit increases? And will the council work with the attorney general to sue the mayor? Well, the council's been putting pressure on the mayor to implement what we budgeted, which was an increase. It's a temporary, limited increase in SNAP benefits. SNAP is like food stamps. Temporary means January 1st through September 30th. The council would like to do more, but this is very costly. And so we'll see what happens with the budget. I'm supportive of extending the SNAP benefits, but the executive, meaning the mayor's, the mayor's administration indicated a couple weeks ago that it wasn't going to spend the money we budgeted for the SNAP benefits. Councilmember Henderson took the lead in expressing displeasure. Councilmembers agreed to sign a group letter. I actually am meeting with the mayor maybe tomorrow about this. So we're putting pressure on the mayor. How can outside groups help? Put pressure on the mayor. Go public, which I guess you think you are, but put pressure, make noise about this, and that would be helpful. I have been advised by our council that I'm wrong when I say that we can't force the mayor to spend money. And so I need to understand why I'm wrong, because it's always been my understanding that we can pass a budget. The mayor can't spend money on items we did not budget, but it doesn't mean she needs to spend the money we did budget, in which case it goes unspent, which is a waste because we want the money to go to food stamps or SNAP. So I don't know that the attorney general is a good option here, but there's ongoing communication and pressure on the mayor to spend this. Lindsay,
When does the chairman expect to hold a hearing on universal out-of-school time legislation?
when does the chairman expect to hold a hearing on universal out-of-school time legislation? At this point, the next opportunity for public input on such legislation would be during performance oversight hearings, which begin in February. I doubt that the committee of the whole will have a hearing on this before we get the budget. But the budget would be a way that we could implement this. Don't get your hopes up. I think this is going to be a difficult budget, but even if we were to pass something tomorrow, it would be subject to appropriation and it could only get funded in the budget. And we get the budget in March, we do performance oversight hearings beginning in February. And then, of course, the budget hearings during the month of April. Lindsay?
What is the chairman's opinion on the Act Now Act provision that repeals some of the limitations on the use of a chokehold?
What is my view on the provision in the mayor's crime bill that repeals the some of the provision regarding chokeholds? So let me I guess let me answer it this way. We know about it's not just a ban on chokeholds, it's a ban on I'm going to say neck restraints. So think of George Floyd and how he was murdered because the police officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes. That's not, I wouldn't call that a chokehold, but that's part of what is prohibited by our law. We passed this law in 2020. We made it permanent in legislation last year. What we had passed was emergency and temporary legislation. The permanent legislation went through last year. The police came forward and said, the chief came forward and said that the way that it was worded, the language was not precise enough so that there could be some unintentional physical contact that's not actually a chokehold, that would not actually constrict somebody's ability to breathe, but would be prohibited. And so the chief asked for some changes to the language to just make it easier to interpret and easier to apply. My sense is that the proposed language is not problematic, and that this is going to be part of what Councilmember Pinto moves before the Judiciary Committee early in the new year. Lindsay?
You've made comments that drug-free zones are unconstitutional. What do you think about drug-free zones and what scope police officers have in drug-free zones as opposed to other areas, regular?
I'm not following the question. It has to do with drug-free zones. I've made comments about favorable to drug-free zones,
That they're unconstitutional.
but that they're unconstitutional.
And why do you think that they are unconstitutional?
Why do I think they're unconstitutional?
Like regular areas and not drug-free zones?
I'm not getting the other areas.
Okay.
So the Supreme Court has been clear, and courts generally have been clear that anti-loitering statutes are unconstitutional. People have a right to stand around. People have a right to assemble. And so these anti-loitering laws are unconstitutional. We used to have drug-free zones. They were basically anti-loitering laws. They said that where the chief found that there had been a significant amount of drug dealing in the previous, let's say, 90 days, that she could define an area and say that there was 2 or more people were not allowed to be stationary within that defined area. And these drug-free zones lasted for a period of, I want to say, like 72 hours, 96 hours. So they were temporary. Unfortunately, at some point, the folks realized that this was unconstitutional. We got there was a hearing, there was quite a bit of testimony about how they were unconstitutional. And then the Attorney General said that could not be enforced and that they should be repealed. So the council unanimously, and the mayor was on the council then, voted to repeal it. The mayor is now trying to resurrect it. She says that it's constitutional, that it's worded differently. I don't quite know how it's worded differently. I don't quite see how it becomes constitutional. So I think they worked. Actually, nobody was ever arrested in them when we used to have them. But I don't think we can, what I mean, I'll put it differently. We can't knowingly adopt a law that we know is unconstitutional, and that will almost certainly get taken to court and an injunction. Now, what have we accomplished? And I, I think people want us to be expending our energy on legislating that actually will have effect, or spend our energy on oversight that can help the police do a better job. Lindsay. There are no more questions? It's 6:02. I'm told there are no more questions. I feel like I've been talking to a computer screen for the last hour. It's much more enjoyable to see you all in person. I think we are doing these every other month in person. Don't know where the next one will be, but we try to move around from ward to ward. And so hope stay tuned, look for a notice from our office of when the next one is. And usually they're like the second Monday of the month. Second Monday if they're virtual, second Saturday if they're in person, and we often change the date, but that will give you a rough idea. Stay tuned. Thank you all for being here. Sorry if I talked too much, and I'll see you next month.